Now, you do know that you wouldn't be able to have a white boy on your roster that feeds you pasta and lobster if it wasn't for Mildred and Richard Loving, right? Well, 56 years ago today, on June 12th, 1967, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that interracial marriage could not be prohibited by state, which meant millions of couples could legally be married and become one. Now, prior to that ruling, interracial marriage was allowed in states outside of the Southeast, and even then, some marriages were still not allowed because it depended on the racial pairings. So, for instance, depending on the race of you and your spouse, you may or may not have been able to get married up until 1967. So, in honor of it being Loving Week, let's look at some marriages of prominent figures that were made possible largely due to that Supreme Court decision. Welcome to the 6th episode of I'll Tell You What. If you're new in the pews, I'll Tell You What is a weekly deep dive at some of the most epic and memorable engagements, weddings, and marriages that have occurred throughout Black history. And I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that brings you these stories every single Monday. For the reason why we're all gathered here today, let's discuss these couples and their weddings and marriages that have occurred throughout the last 56 years. So did you know that Clay Morrow from Sons of Anarchy was married to a Jamaican woman for almost 40 years? Yes. Well, rather, actor Ron Perlman was married to Opal Stone, a Jamaican-born New Yorker. So in 1967, Ron was an aspiring actor who was working at his friend's jewelry store in New York. One day, a woman and her friends walked in, and she took his breath away. He said this was, quote, the most beautiful girl he had ever laid his eyes on. He gave her a job at the store, which was actually something he didn't have the permission to do, but she accepted. And through talking it over with his friend, he allowed it. At the time, he was just this kid that had a crush on her, and 4 months later, he asked her out on a first date, coincidentally on Valentine's Day. They obviously had a great date because 3 months later, they got a place and moved in together. Because when you know, you know. He said one thing he admired about her was that, quote, she seemed to be ready to go all the way and take whatever came. So as someone who was very much in those early stages of his career, this meant a lot. So while he was filming the movie A Quest for Fire in Europe, he had a few months off in between shooting, so he flew Opal out to see him. Now they spent 2 weeks traveling throughout various places in the United Kingdom and France. And once they got back home to the United States on February 11, 1981, Ron asked Opal to marry him. His words were, quote, "Eff it, let's get married." More precisely, for them to get married on Valentine's Day, since it would have been the 5th year anniversary of their first date. Now, Opal was like, how are we going to do that when that's literally 4 days away? He said, well, let's just get the blessings from our moms, take our best friends and closest family, and just go to the courthouse since we're practically married anyway. She responded with, quote, well, okay, you crazy ass MF. Okay, yes. He found a justice of the peace that was able to fit them in at 1:30 on Valentine's Day, and along with Opal's sisters Janice and Sharon and his best friend Burton Levy and Burton's friend, they drove to the home of the justice of the peace and officially got married on his front lawn. Now, a few years later, when Ron was filming a movie called Ice Pirates, Opal got pregnant. Now, apparently the conception felt very intentional, as she asked him, quote, WTF, what do you think you're doing? You know, she didn't say WTF, she actually said it, because she was concerned that they didn't have the money to be parents then. So then Ron's like, let's go for a ride. Takes her up this hill in Hollywood, turns to her, and is like, the right time to have a kid is when it happens. And yeah, they actually were pregnant. They had their first child, a daughter named Blake Amanda, on Saturday, January 7th, 1984. She was born the day after his first performance in this play called Les Tragédies de Carmen. After the play's run ended, which was about 8 months later, Opal and Ron actually decided to move to Hollywood so Ron would have a better chance at his acting career. Now, years later, they would actually go on to have their second child, Brandon Perlman, during Ron's time on the CBS show Beauty and the Beast. But Also, around that time, the show was coming to an end, which kind of sucked because right before that, they had purchased this home that they absolutely loved, but it was twice the amount they were willing to spend. Now, hoping for the best, they went for it anyway and closed, only for his show to get canceled literally the next month. Ron said that the 2 years afterwards, they basically survived off savings, but Opal was never stressed. Quote, she acted as if nothing was wrong and another job would come along just as it always had. She truly believed in her man. But look, their marriage wasn't easy, especially then. Ron said the 90s was his roughest decade. They went through a period where they sought marriage counseling and did that for more than half a year until they realized that, hey, we could argue for free at home. He also realized that he was taking a lot of his frustration out on Opal because she was the, quote, closest one to blame. However, Ron and Opal would persevere through the good times, bad times, and the in-between for 38 years. But on November 5th, 2019, Ron would file for divorce. By the time the end of their marriage was made public, Ron had begun to see an actress named Allison Dunbar, allegedly. And in 2022, Ron and Allison got married after 3 years of dating. Now, I don't believe Opal remarried, but you can find her on Instagram at Opal Stone Design because, as her name says it, she's actually a jewelry designer. Alright, so that wraps the story of Ron and Opal, but now it's time for us to discuss another couple, one of my faves. Most people are aware of Jordan Peele due to his acting career and his directorial success of movies like Get Out and Nope. But did you know that he was married to comedian and actress Chelsea Peretti? Now, Jordan Peele was born in 1979 in New York City to a white mother and an African-American father. He was raised by his mother in Manhattan. At the age of 12, he knew he wanted to be a film director and thus pursue a career in the entertainment industry. Meanwhile, Chelsea was born in Oakland, California, to parents of European descent. She's the younger sister of Jonah Peretti, who was the co-founder of media companies BuzzFeed and the Huffington Post. When Chelsea and Jordan met, he was acting on several shows, including his sketch comedy series with Keegan-Michael Key, Key and Peele. Chelsea was playing Gina Linetti on the Fox show Brooklyn Nine-Nine. They met on Twitter in 2013 after Jordan complimented a web series that Chelsea did. At some point after that, they started dating, but it wasn't publicly known until the end of summer 2014. They attended a Comedy Central Creative Arts Emmy party together, and the following week went to the Emmys together as well. Now, their relationship was very low-key. Now, they were seen supporting each other at different events and engagements, but overall preferred a very chill relationship. Jordan mentioned that when they weren't working, they would, quote, stay at home, cook, do the dishes, and improvise musicals. Now, around Thanksgiving of 2015, Chelsea and Jordan announced that they were engaged on Twitter. Chelsea tweeted, quote, my fiance, LOLOL, at Jordan Peele, proposed to me last night during the Family Talent Show, LOLOL. Jordan tweeted at the same time his version of the announcement by adding Chelsea and adding the engagement ring emoji. This started a slew of congratulations, and random pop news outlets would speculate the details of their wedding. One article wondered if Chelsea's coworker and childhood friend, Andy Samberg, would be the best man since he allegedly put in a good word on behalf of Jordan to Chelsea when they first started dating. All this speculation would be for naught because less than 6 months later, the following spring, they announced that not only had they gotten married, but actually eloped. In April 2016, Chelsea posted a picture on Instagram of her wedding bouquet, wedding bands, and their dog, which apparently was the only one that attended their wedding. Now, when speaking about their elopement, Jordan said, quote, we spent the money on ourselves and we had a day for us and we sort of got away and it was the best thing we could have done. I recommend elopement to anyone. So you probably remember around that same spring, there were these Booking.com commercials that centered around their engagement and wedding planning. In winter 2017, the week after Beyonce announced her pregnancy with the twins, Chelsea broke the news that she, too, was expecting. She posted a picture of her and her baby bump on Instagram with the caption, Beyonce Schmonce. And by summer of 2017, Jordan and Chelsea became first-time parents to their son, Beaumont Gino Peele. They haven't shared pictures of their son online because, I mean, let's be real, people are extremely weird. But yeah, they're still married and thriving in their respective careers, and I suppose in their personal lives too. Absolutely love that for them. Alright, so now it's time for us to discuss a couple that definitely had a moment over a decade ago, Paula Patton and Robin Thicke. You remember when Robin Thicke and Paula Patton were still married? Now, though their marriage ended on a very bad note, we can recall the happier times. Paula and Robin were both born and raised in Los Angeles. Paula was born to a white mother and an African American father, and though she has a mixed background, she was quoted saying she finds the term biracial, quote, offensive. It's a way for people to separate themselves from African Americans, a way of saying, I'm better than that. So, for all intents and purposes, please call Paula Patton black. Robin, as many know, is the child of entertainers. His mom is actress-singer Gloria Loring, who was on Days of Our Lives, and his dad was Alan Thicke from Growing Pains. Now picture it, 1991. You probably heard that they were high school sweethearts, but they actually met at a teen club called Ballistics. She was 15 and he was 14. Now they began dating in 93, and 12 years later, in 2005, they got married. But while they were planning their wedding, they hired this wedding stationery company called Paper Source to design their invitations. And the calligrapher actually assigned to their wedding invitations was this aspiring actress named Meghan Markle to be precise. In 2007, Paula said to Ebony magazine she hoped, quote, to have a family someday, but didn't see that happening anytime in the near future. And when asked about Paula in 2008, Robin said, quote, when I'm with my wife and we make love, that's when I'm as close to God as possible. So in 2010, they created the family they always wanted. Robin and Paula's son, Julian Hueido, was born. Now, throughout their relationship, Paula would actually write on some of his songs under the pen name Max Haddington, so it didn't seem like he was, quote, writing with his girl. Paula would also be Robin's inspiration and the reason for a lot of his musical choices. Now, y'all remember the drama around blurred lines, right? From the lyrics possibly hinting to a lack of consent, aka ape rape, to the models in the video, which also led to it getting temporarily banned from YouTube, to of course the issues with Marvin Gaye's family. Now Robin said Paula, quote, urged him to put the video out, which we don't know how true that was or wasn't. But there was a point where she could have also been seen as his excuse and scapegoat in addition to being his muse. Now this was also around the time that some might have thought that Robin was wildin', in addition to some of the other photos and gossip that circulated around that time. So what happened next probably wasn't a surprise to many. Now less than a year later, in February 2014, Paula and Robin's separation was announced. This news came after almost 21 years of being together and almost a decade of being married. The joint statement they put out read, quote, we will always love each other and be best friends, however, we have mutually decided to separate at this time. But shortly afterwards, Robin would say he was trying to get his woman back. He would even try dropping an album named after her that really didn't do too well. I don't even remember hearing it. When discussing that album, DJ Booth said, quote, Paula deserves better and so do the listeners. But I read a Vox article that said essentially they felt like this was his way of trying to go back to the R&B roots that we knew him as and to kind of prove that Blurred Lines was kind of an anomaly and not really what we should associate him with. Granted, it's his biggest song. Their divorce was finalized by March 2015, and she said the reasons for it were infidelity, physical abuse, and drug abuse, though Robin denied all of those allegations. And in the years afterwards, the news would cover Robin's relationship with the 21-year-old model named April Love Geary, restraining order requests between Paula and Robin, and other salacious stories that I'm sure they tried shielding from their son Julian. But when someone has been in your life for such a long period of time, you still have this special place in your heart for them. After Robin's father, Alan, passed away in 2016, Paula posted a tribute on Instagram that said, I knew Alan since I was 15 years old. and he had a tremendous effect on my life. I loved and respected him so much. So many great memories and laughs together. We will miss him so much. His grandson is quite sure he is still here with us in spirit. In 2017, they agreed on a custody arrangement of their son where he'd stay with both of them throughout various points in the week. And 2 years ago, Robin told People magazine that he and Paula were in a better place. Quote, "There's so much emotion when you first break up, and there's so much stuff that spills over. But time heals those wounds, and she's an incredible person." And he also would go on to say that they realized that the most important person here is actually Julian. So whatever they need to do to ensure Julian's happiness, they were going to do. It's always good when two people that have so much shared history can mature beyond the hurt that was inflicted. All right, so now let's wrap with the actor that is probably very much known for his interracial relationships and marriages. Any guesses on who that is? Let's take a quick break. So have you ever heard this rumor that Italian men love black women? Like, this was something I'd always heard of, but I never actually saw any proof of it. Like, I came up in the era of Jersey Shore, like the first iteration, and I don't remember ever seeing Vinny or like The Situation meeting a black girl at the club and asking her out on a date. But you know what? I now believe with my heart of hearts that rumor was probably created because of Robert De Niro. So now we must go back to the late 1960s. Robert was in his early 20s when he met a woman of Creole/Haitian descent named Diahnne Abbott. She was around the same age and also a single mother of a daughter named Diahnne, and she was also a club singer. At the time, Robert was unemployed, so nothing really came from their meeting, but years later, they would run into each other again. They would start to date in the early 1970s. Now, sometime between late 1973 and summer of 1974, Robert, Diahnne, and her daughter Diahnne would move in together. Realizing his 14th Street apartment in New York would not be big enough for all of them and their pets, he bought a townhome in Greenwich Village that Diahnne renovated. However, he kept the other apartment too, just in case. Now, 1976 would be a great year for Robert personally. By April, Diahnne would become his wife, and they would get married at the New York Society for Ethical Culture on Central Park West. The people that attended their wedding consisted of, quote, everybody who had helped Bobby to become a different person. These guests included Martin Scorsese, Harvey Keitel, and Shelley Winters, just to name a few. Also that year, he would become a father, twice. He would formally adopt Diahnne, who never knew who her biological father was, according to everything I read, and Robert and Diahnne would welcome their second child on November 9th, a son named Raphael, which was named after the hotel in which he was conceived in. Now, everything I read told me that Robert prioritized his career and his love of acting and theater, and that was sometimes to the detriment of his relationships. So by 1979, just 3 years after they got married, they would separate. Apparently part of their troubles came from the fact that they were just ultimately two different people. Robert, even as an Academy Award-winning actor, preferred simple niceties in life, whereas Diahnne, on the other hand, liked being outside and partying. She definitely liked being seen. So that, plus the fact that her cats would damage their rental homes and sometimes like hotels they would stay in, thus causing Robert to have to pay very healthy amounts to repair what had been done, I'm sure did not help. So also around this time, he met a woman named Helena Springs. They would casually date for a few years and she would actually get pregnant twice. Now, the first time, she terminated the pregnancy without telling him, but the second time, she told him that she was pregnant. He wanted her to get rid of the child, but she didn't, and on July 1st, 1982, she gave birth to a daughter named Nina, a name he helped her pick. Now, allegedly, Robert gave her $50,000 to take care of the child, and shortly after that, he wouldn't see them again for at least 3 years. Now, through his separation to Diahnne, he'd also be seen with various attractive young black women, but he'd rarely be seen with any one of them more than once or twice. Now, none of these girls really had any staying power, not until he met a socialite named Doris Smith, or Toukie Smith. Toukie was the younger sister of fashion designer Willie Smith of Willie Wear Limited, and she was also an Alvin Ailey dancer, actress, and Wilhelmina model. She met Robert at a party in the 1980s, and like his first wife Diahnne, she liked socializing and being seen. But the difference between the two might have been that while Diahnne relied on the proximity of celebrities she was afforded through her marriage to Robert, Toukie was actually somebody without him. To prove it, Google her or look up old Ebony and Jet magazines. She was frequently noted in the Words of the Week column. It didn't take long for the news to pick up that they were dating, especially after the divorce to Diahnne was finalized in the late 1980s. Now, while this might have been a time of new beginnings for Robert, it was a rough period for Toukie. Her mom passed away, then her brother unexpectedly passed away to what we now know as AIDS, and then she miscarried her child with Robert. But perhaps this also made her relationship to him stronger, or at least more empathetic. Together, they would organize an event at his Tribeca Grill restaurant where the proceeds would benefit people diagnosed with AIDS. In January 1991, the news broke that Toukie was adopting a 2-year-old named LaToya after unsuccessfully conceiving with Robert. The little girl's mother had passed away from AIDS, which I'm sure tugged at Toukie's heartstrings. However, something must have occurred because I don't believe that adoption ever went through. In August 1992, however, Robert would deal with a little bit of drama. You remember the ex-girlfriend I was telling you about, Helena, that had a baby named Nina, right? Well, Helena would spin the block in the form of a child support suit. She claimed that because Robert had voluntarily contributed financially to the child, that he should have continued to do so this whole time. She was looking for $3,500 a month in child support, despite the fact that since the last time she saw Robert, she got married. The California State Superior Court ordered Robert to complete a blood test and continue to pay for child support and tuition for the child's school, which was about $1,000 a month. Now, the blood test results came back, and Robert De Niro, you are not the father. So knowing this, Helena continued with the suit only for the court to ultimately rule in Robert's favor, because be for real. Meanwhile, around this time, not only was Robert sort of seeing Toukie, he was also seeing this young British supermodel named Naomi Campbell. He would continue to see them both off and on for years. But by late 1995, Robert and Toukie would actually have twins via surrogate. Boys named Aaron Kendrick and Julian Henry. And a few weeks later, Robert's publicist would actually put out a statement declaring that he and Toukie had basically broken up, but were co-parenting. These two would end up in family court because though initially they were supposed to be just Toukie's children, Robert developed a bond with them in addition to them developing bonds with Robert's other 2 children. So then they temporarily agreed to alternate custody in 4-day increments. And as his relationship to his girlfriend of 8 years, Toukie, was ending, a relationship with another socialite was beginning. This socialite is a woman named Grace Hightower. Now, technically, he met Grace in 1987 when she worked at Mr. Chow. Grace was born in Kilmichael, Mississippi, and has African American and Blackfoot Indian heritage. She used to be a flight attendant with TWA and then became a model. But also in the 1990s, Robert would be seen around town with a photographer named Anne Marie Fox. They date briefly, but ultimately he found love in Grace, and they would move in together in 1996. Then, of course, there were rumors of them wanting to get married, especially after she was seen wearing a 10-carat emerald-cut diamond engagement ring that was speculated to cost more than $100,000. The rumors also stated that they were working out a prenuptial agreement. But on June 17th, Grace and Robert got married in New York in front of about 12 people, including Joe Pesci, who was his best man, and friend Harvey Keitel. They had their reception dinner at Deputy Canal House in High Falls, New York. Their dinner consisted of a 5-course meal that had a wakame and lobster and rice paper and poussin breast with cranberry quince stuffing. I hope I pronounced that right. 10 months later, they would welcome a son, Elliot, into the world. He would be born on March 18th, 1998. By summer of 1999, sadly, Robert would tell Grace that he actually wanted a divorce. They weren't agreeing on how to care for their son, as they were learning that he had developmental challenges, in addition to just Robert and Grace having lifestyle issues. Now, Robert bought Grace a 3-bedroom condo in Trump Palace. In March 2000, they signed an agreement regarding financial support not only for Grace and Elliot, but also worked out the details of the custody arrangement. Now, this situation got uglier as they were on a boat with Mark Anthony and his wife at the time, and Grace alleged that she saw Robert fooling around with the wife of the captain of the boat. Now, Robert obviously denied that, and then he would claim that Grace actually fractured his ribs and would file a motion requesting unsupervised overnight visits and a legal guardian appointed for Elliot. The following month, allegedly, Grace would say that Robert had a drug and alcohol problem and shouldn't be with their son alone. Ultimately, with all the back and forth and the he said, she said, the judge felt like they just needed to quote, be evaluated by a court-approved psychologist. They would eventually resolve their issues because by the summer of 2003, they would resume living together. In the following fall, they'd actually renew their vows in front of 150 friends, including Martin Scorsese, Meryl Streep, Harvey Keitel, Tom Brokaw, Ben Stiller, and all of Robert's children. The dinner was catered by Nobu, and the wedding cake was a raspberry Napoleon baked by Daniel Boulud, and everyone sipped on Veuve Clicquot. Now, years would go by without much news about the couple, but in the summer of 2011, they would actually do something that would shock a lot of people, press and otherwise. Grace and Robert will become parents again. They would have their daughter Helen Grace with the help of a surrogate. Now, at the time, Grace was 56 and Robert was 68. Can you imagine having a baby at that age? By November 2018, their 20-plus year marriage would come to an end when they separated, this time seemingly for good. Robert would release a statement that read, quote, Grace and I have 2 beautiful children together. We are entering a period of transition in our relationship, which is a difficult but constructive process. I honor Grace as a wonderful mother and ask for privacy and respect from all as we proceed to develop our roles as partners in parenting. He had a good publicist. His statements were always just chef's kiss. But anyway, since then, it seems apparently that they've both moved on. Grace is continuing her work with Coffee of Grace, her coffee brand that has different blends made by Rwandan farmers, and of course, being a mom to Elliot and Helen. And Robert is currently dating Tiffany Chen, a martial arts instructor that he met back in 2015 when they were both working on the movie The Intern. And just last month, we all learned that they welcomed a child together, baby Gia Virginia Chen De Niro. And friends, that wraps Loving Week on I'll Tell You What. And if you want to know more about any of the couples that we cover, definitely check the notes for links on the stories in the books that aided my research. Alright, so you should know what time it is. It's time for Shown Ups. This is our weekly chance to share some of the wedding moments that have occurred within all of us all runners. Now, this week's Shown Up is of all runner Damaris and her hubby Scott. They met on eHarmony in 2012, got engaged 3 years later, and then they got married on August 26, 2016. She said Scott won her over with his cooking skills, more specifically preparing Cajun cuisines as he's from New Orleans. The photographer that captured their beautiful photos is Michael Clark of Michael Clark Studios. Y'all look so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Thank y'all so much for sharing. All runners, we want to see your wedding moments too. Don't forget to complete the form in the notes below, and you may see yourself on an upcoming episode of I'll Tell You What as well. All right, all runners, a little bit of news here. One, I'll Tell You What is finally its own standalone podcast. So if you enjoy podcasts and like listening to podcasts, I encourage you to subscribe and leave us a review. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Play. And also, we have a new merch shop. You could grab a tee, a sticker, a mug, or more by going to IsleTell.com. That's AisleTell.com. And of course, don't forget to follow us everywhere you can because we're actually doing the giveaway this week. My bad, OG. I forgot, but we're doing it this week. All the links that I mentioned throughout this episode are also in the notes below. And hey, if you ever want to make a request or advertise with us or just want to chat, feel free to hit me up at aisle@hueido.com. That's AISLE@HUEIDO.com. And if you want to follow me, you can find me at Demitash on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. It's DEMITASHE. Next week, we're going to be discussing some weddings and marriages of very prominent leaders in Black media. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the pews.